Great. Well, now we're moving to our next speaker. I don't think needs much of an introduction. Melia Belli is associate professor in art history and visual studies at University of Victoria. She specialises in the art of South Asia, and she's published widely on many aspects of South Asian culture. The breadth of her interests is really extraordinary, from Rajput memorials and Buddhist buildings to Rajasthani folk songs. And today she's going to be talking about the artistic response to two garment factory disasters in Bangladesh. So please, let's welcome Melia Belli.
Louis and I coordinated our outfits today, as did Umbreen. So, okay. So this goes forward, okay. Good morning. You can hear me? Good. So I would like to begin by sincerely thanking Betty Kennedy for hosting the Company of Ideas, and thanking you, Professor James Fox, for inviting me here. It's a great honor. So since the Industrial Revolution, as many of us know, cheap manual labor, largely performed by young, lower-class women, this has granted consumers access to affordable clothing. And to keep costs down, factory managers divert funds from workers' pay and safety, and this at times has had disastrous consequences. And the first of these disastrous consequences, of course, was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in Manhattan in 1911, which killed 146 workers. So these types of accidents can frequently galvanize labor reforms, but unfortunately, they're not always universal. So since the mid-20th century, what manufacturers have done is to outsource to the global south. This too, of course, has had disastrous consequences. And Bangladesh offers us two very tragic examples. The first was the Tazreen Fashions factory fire in Dhaka, the capital, in 2012. 112 workers were killed in this fire. And then the following year, so 2013, a building known as Rana Plaza collapsed, and 1,135 people died in that accident. So Rana Plaza was the deadliest garment factory accident in history and most lethal structural failure in modern history. So although these two Bangladeshi accidents occurred nearly a century after the Triangle fire, there are a number of very striking similarities. They're united, for example, by analogous safety violations and the demographics of the victims. The overwhelming majority of the victims were young women. And this has led the American historian and quilter Robin Burson, whose work we're going to look at, to comment, what we've done is export tragedy. So artivists, including Burson and Bangladeshi Taslima Akhtar and Dilara Begum Jolly, they responded creatively to the Bangladeshi garment factory disasters, and they produced affective artworks that engage different publics. Their work sheds light on nexes of gendered labor, memorialization, and visual art. So I've used this term artivism, and it is a portmanteau, art and activism, and it seeks to be politically disruptive. It critiques topics such as war, capitalism, globalization, environmental issues, and more. And artivism often seeks to take art out of institutions, so galleries, academies, museums, into social spaces to engage with impacted communities in hopes of effecting change and social transformation at the grassroots. Burson, Akhtar, and Jolly's artivism shares in an ability to convey the pain, and by pain I mean both psychological and physical, of the victims and their surviving family members. Their works also confront the guilty, demanding their accountability. As many labor violations remain at large throughout the global garment industry, these artivists raise very important questions, I think, about the moral responsibilities that citizens, corporations, and consumers, the responsibilities that we all have towards those who make our clothing. So I begin with Burson's work, and she and Akhtar oversaw and collaborated on community memorial quilt projects. And they did this to bring these 3 disasters into conversation. So in total, Burson and Akhtar supervised production of 7 quilts. Allusions to trauma and loss conveyed in both text and image unite these 7 textiles. Their quilts comprise a memorial cycle that stitches together 2 cultures separated by thousands of miles and 3 deadly accidents that bookend the 20th century. So we're looking at Burson's New York-based project, which comprises 2 quilts, and they're collectively called Workers' Memorial Quilts. So that's what you're looking at here. And both the textiles they're large, 10 by 7 feet, and Burson designed and sewed these 2 textiles with professional quilters and volunteer art students. So that's important to keep in mind because these workers are skilled. So we turn to the first quilt, which memorializes the victims of the Triangle factory fire. And as you can see, you have these vibrantly hued squares, and they contrast with the sepia-hued or black and white photographs of the victims. They're also dressed in these shirtwaist shirts that the company manufactured. So, and Burson and her team culled these images from early 20th century newspapers, so they're photographs of the victims. And as you can see, they have their names and ages embroidered under the photographs. And the ages, the majority are in their early 20s, although the youngest was just 13 at the time of death. So as you can also see in the detail, there is a kind of focus on these flames, these applique flames that of course reference the fire. Burson's 2014 quilt is of the same media, and of course it memorializes the victims from the 2 Bangladeshi garment factory disasters. It has similar squares of textiles, but here the major difference, of course, is that the victims are recognizably South Asian and they are dressed in saris. Under their names in a number of cases is the Bangla word nikoj, or missing. So one square depicts a man and a woman, and when I first saw it, as I'll discuss, it's a very well-known photograph, and when I first saw it, I thought that maybe the subjects were dancing, but of course when you look closer, it's very evident that they're covered in dust and their lower bodies are swallowed in rubble. Final Embrace, Rana Plaza, is embroidered under the scene. So viewed together, Burson's Workers' Memorial Quilts conveys an incredible poignancy, I think, and that as tragic as the loss of 146 young lives was over a century ago, even more disturbing is that entrenched systems of structural violence and inequality continue to perpetuate similar accidents today. Bangladeshi photojournalist, professor of photography, and garment factory activist Taslima Akhtar, she's the photographer of Final Embrace. And of course, that's what appears on Burson's quilt. So, like hundreds of other Bangladeshis, Akhtar was involved in the rescue efforts at Rana Plaza. And she spent a number of days searching through the rubble for survivors. And she discovered these bodies and photographed them exactly as she saw them. So I really see this photograph, Final Embrace, as an unedited and uncropped record of bearing witness. So in the man's final moments, he performed this eminently human gesture of trying to shelter his coworker from the falling debris. Of the innumerable photographs of the disaster, Final Embrace presents the victims as relatable, feeling individuals. And I think this is important because what it does, at least for me, is that it shifts the emphasis from this staggering number of 1,135 people dead that it's so staggering it can be numbing. And it shifts our attention then to actual people for this much more affectual charge. Final Embrace was named one of Time Magazine's top 10 most important photographs of 2013. Now, a number of critics have, of course, criticized the photograph as being essentially disaster porn. However, I think it demonstrates how a photograph can potentially affect real change. This photograph sparked online campaigns to pressure brands to institute minimum wages and boost safety procedures in their Bangladeshi factories. And the Swedish brand H&M, in fact, did rise to the occasion, and it implemented better safety standards in their Bangladeshi factories. But as for the corpses that you see, they remain unidentified as far as I know today. 5 additional quilts complete the cycle and complement Burson's workers' memorial quilts. So in consultation with Burson in 2018, Akhtar oversaw production of these 5 quilts, and she worked with 15 local Bangladeshi women who were skilled only in domestic embroidery. And each one of these women had lost an intimate family member in one of the Bangladeshi disasters. So I'll return to these in a moment. But Akhtar's quilts, I think you can immediately tell they really differ from Burson's. And to me, something that immediately caught my attention was the prevalence of these clearly hand-executed running stitches. So look, for example, at the pink square, the border, that's what I'm talking about. They also, different from Burson's quilt, Akhtar's offer these sections of well-worn faded cloth rather than new textiles. Now, these quilts are what are known as nokshikatas, and this is a distinctive type of Bengali hand-sewn and embroidered quilts that have really been a feature of the domestic landscape throughout the region of Bengal for centuries. They're ubiquitous throughout everyone's home. So women stitch and embroider these kanthas in multi-generational groups from strips of old saris and other worn-out garments. So the kantas are thus imbued with these intimate memories of home and comfort that span generations. And each of Akhtar's volunteers contributed a square and the squares were from the victims' worn garments. And then they sewed an image of that same victim. And this, of course, really infuses each one of these squares with this very powerful affective and indexical charge. So as you can see, just for comparison, a Nakshikanta in the lower right. And then in the upper right, there are women working on these the memorial project that Akhtar oversaw, but that's not so different from how women make other Nakshikantas and how they have for centuries. So to commemorate the 5th anniversary of Rana Plaza, Akhtar and Burson, together with the Bangladesh Garment Workers Solidarity Organization, they displayed the 5 kantas at the vacant lot where Rana Plaza had stood. And they held an exhibition titled Memorial Quilts and Words. Now, as you can see in the left-hand image, next to the kanta are hung garments. These are garments that were salvaged from the Rana Plaza disaster. So this is what the companies in Rana Plaza were making. And this part of the exhibition, it really, to me, illustrates cause and effect. You've got product and then the cost of, the human cost of fast fashion. So with these projects, Burson and Akhtar joined a number of international, predominantly women artists who critique labor abuses of factory workers. These artists do so through their empathetic, embodied, textile-based artwork. And one such artist is American Therese Agnew. She created Portrait of a Textile Worker in 2006 to comment on the invisibility and, as a corollary, the perceived disposability of garment workers. So Agnew discusses how she was really struck by how those who make our clothing are anonymous, and yet those who design them, we know who they are, and in fact, in many cases, their very names grace our clothing, especially the labels. So Agnew made this international appeal for labels, and tens of thousands of people from throughout the world cut out their clothing labels and sent them to her. And she stitched them together. So this is all made of labels. She stitched them together, and it replicates a well-known photograph of an anonymous woman, young woman, at a working in a garment factory in Dhaka. And the project took Agnew over 2 years, and I'm sure it was a physically uncomfortable labor. And I want to return to that point in a moment. So Burson, Akhtar, and Agnew's medium was very apt, I think, for a number of reasons. And I want to just take a minute to unpack that, the appropriateness of textiles, specifically quilts, in memorializing garment workers. So first, of course, is that quilting is a deeply gendered craft. It affords women around the world, especially those who are marginalized or silenced, a vehicle for self-expression. It also offers opportunities to safely protest systems of inequality, and that's important when overt political confrontation may be may be too dangerous. So I think we can all think of examples. Some that I chose include quilts created to protest slavery, racism. One that the Canadian audience knows well is residential school quilts. Others protest dictatorships and war. The point is, though, Akhtar and her quilters were in very good global company. Their project and exhibition enabled those directly affected by the disasters, that is, the quilters, it enabled them to publicly express their loss and anger through needlework, which is a socially acceptable, nearly universally feminine craft. Now, second, Burson and Akhtar's medium was very appropriate for its affiliations with labor movements. Quilters collaborate, plan, design, and create the final project. Also, you might have noticed the text on Burson's quilt. Those are excerpts from early 20th century labor and union songs. Also in step with labor movements, the 7 textiles honor individual workers through the inclusion of their names and portraits, which personalizes, ennobles, and makes the victim's subjects more relatable when we can see them. Now, third, Burson and Akhtar's projects join this global tradition of memorial quilts. These textiles ensure that victims and offenses are remembered. When quilters work together on memorial projects, this collaboration can be cathartic, and it provides an opportunity to memorialize their shared grief and perhaps assist in each other's healing. The fourth reason that quilting is a very apt way to memorialize garment workers is that this is the same media, of course, that claimed their lives, textiles and needlecraft. Furthermore, Burson and Akhtar, like Agnew, engaged in this exacting, repetitive manual labor of stitching and embroidery. Now, I'm no seamstress, but I have very briefly dipped my toe into the sartorial waters, and I can attest that it's difficult and it can be painful because it wears on the joints and it can cause neck and eye strain. So I really think that these quilters were mimicking and embodying the actions, on a much smaller scale, of course, but the actions that garment workers continuously perform during their long shifts. These artivists were empathizing with the workers and embodying their quotidian realities of aching joints and other pains. This imbues their work with this affective charge as the artists became embodied witnesses. So I'm going to return at the end of my talk to what this can actually mean or do, perhaps. So also doubtlessly appealing to Burson and Akhtar about the medium is that as designer of the Names Project, better known as the AIDS quilt, as Cleve Jones notes, quilts are really redolent with nostalgia. They stimulate these very positive memories of warmth, home, and family. And so they would contrast very provocatively with mass-produced garments, machinery, and the factory's inhospitable working conditions. Another intersection between the garment factory and AIDS quilts is their respective national signification. So cultural theorist Marita Sturken describes the AIDS quilt as a communally produced cultural object. Quilting is really emblematic of American craft. But the AIDS quilt, of course, disrupts these dominant portrayals of Americanness because it brings other Americans into the national discourse, homosexuals and intravenous drug users. So similarly, Akhtar and her quilters are employing this quintessential Bengali textile, the kantha, to memorialize victims who in life were probably overlooked by mainstream Bangladeshi society. So Akhtar's kantas assert that although socially marginalized, garment workers too are Bangladeshi. So I turn now to Dilara Begum Jolly. She is an internationally renowned artist, and she began creating art that deals with women's issues at the beginning of her career in the 1980s. Since then, she's addressed issues such as abuses against women in wartime, the politics of reproduction, and their oppression in religious institutions. Between 2012 and 2018, Jolly created several multimedia artworks that address exploitation in the garment factory sector, especially in Bangladesh. So she first displayed these works in 2014 in her solo exhibition that was titled Threads of Testimony. And it's important where it was shown. It was shown in this very upscale gallery called the Bengal Art Lounge. And it's in a diplomatic district, which has it's very well-to-do elite district. And that's, of course, very different from the reception for the memorial quilts that I just showed, which were a much more intimate, local audience. Jolly's audience for the Threads exhibition brought artivism that's critical of the global garment industry to international, wealthy, and possibly influential viewers. This audience could potentially be moved to empathize and initiate top-down improvements. So as you'll notice from this work and the others that we'll see, the palette for the Threads exhibition was stark black and white. This is really different from Jolly's usual work, and it's significant to a Bangladeshi audience because black and white is the color of martyrdom in the country, and it would evoke for Dhakkaites, those in the capital, the photocopies of missing persons posters that were plastered all over Dhaka in the wake of Rana Plaza. And Jolly silk screened a number of white saris with actual missing persons posters, and that's what you're looking at here. So as you'll notice, interspersed with the posters that offer a face and biodata of the missing are posters that have no image, and such as the one at the bottom on the left. And it just simply says in Bangla, there is no, there is no photograph of our daughter. And I can imagine that that is from a family who are too poor to afford a camera. So that reminded me of Susan Sontag and Roland Barthes' concepts that photographs prove that something or someone existed. So what are we to make of these imageless posters? To me, they suggest that these young women didn't truly exist as individuals, that they existed solely as producers of textiles for the neoliberal global market and money for their families. So early in her career, Jolly was searching for a distinctly feminine and local creative lexicon. And this synecdotal kanta met her requirements, and it remains a hallmark of her work. And you might be thinking, what on earth does this have to do with those quilts that I just showed you? Well, unlike Akhtar, Jolly references kantas and, by extension, Bengali feminine domestic labor through, if you look closely, she executes these very punctilious staccato dashes. And of course, these mimic these running stitches of the kanta quilts. And they carry all of that association with them on her paintings and drawings. So her kantha stitches are also brought forward in her garment factory-themed artivism. So threads of testimony included nearly a dozen pen and ink drawings, such as what you're looking at. And these address women's socially determined roles as producers of women, and producers of children and garments. So you're looking at Jolly's pen and ink drawing, Amora, which means placenta, from 2012, and it offers this dense web of regularly spaced stitch-like dashes. Those articulate, of course, the profile of a woman who is shrouded in a burqa, and this impossibly large placenta is hovering above her midsection. So the placenta's hieratic scale and media, coupled with the subject's, if you've noticed, lack of features, seems to highlight women's reductions to their reproductive roles and their value as producers of domestic and money-generating labor. So Amora, of course, frames these tropes of women's biological and social roles in a religious garment, thereby suggesting that it identifies religion as one cause of gender inequality. So for the last work that I will show you, sorry, I'm trying to speak and turn. Okay, so for the last work that I will share with you, this is the installation that dominated the last room of the Bengal Art Lounge for Jolly's Threads exhibition. And it targeted the managers of Tasreen Nama and Rana Plaza. It targeted them to empathize and feel guilt for their negligence. So in this installation, Jolly laid a table out with 10 place settings. And these, as you can see, are of clear resin, and embedded in them are personal effects that the artist personally harvested from the Rana Plaza disaster site. So in some of them, you can see bobby pins still with hair in them, and grains of boiled rice that were from smashed lunch boxes. And the placemats are missing persons posters. And the cutlery, to me, it really evokes corpses and winding shrouds. And the material, of course, is white t-shirt material. So Jolly personally invited what I call the guests of dishonor to her dystopian dinner party, to the gallery opening, to her exhibition opening. And she was demanding that the managers, she was demanding their accountability and acknowledgement of the victims as individuals. And what I love, the perhaps only kind of happy part of my talk today, is that one manager did actually come. He clearly didn't get the memo of the theme, and he was really upset and promptly stormed out. And the story was carried in a national newspaper the next day. So, yeah. So in their affective garment factory themed artivism, Burson, Akhtar, and Jolly bear witness and give testimony on behalf of workers alive and dead. Their methodologies and processes that evoke a garment worker's labors are physically and emotionally demanding. This enables these artivists to empathetically feel into their subjects' travails, however briefly. But such methodologies and processes imbue these artworks with an emotional charge that then I think is translated to us, the viewers. Reception of their artivism is undoubtedly, intentionally uncomfortable because it presents those who we would probably rather not think about or see as individuals who suffer and who are loved and mourned. An oft-cited criticism of socially engaged art is that it fails often to elicit concrete changes. However, perhaps affective artivism that moves viewers to feel into another's pain may just be groundwork for change. As the art historians Caroline Turner and Jen Webb note, this kind of cultural activism can pave the way for political activism through affectual engagement. Artivism, I think, can mobilize. So we looked at the small change that, for example, Final Embrace caused, the changes that H&M made in their Bangladeshi factories. So the impact of Burson, Akhtar, and Jolly's artivism may still be germinating. Perhaps, along with other examples of socially engaged artivism, theirs will elicit an emotional response strong enough to mobilize viewers into action, generating personal, social, and political change. What could that look like? Well, in Bangladesh, maybe that would inspire citizens to vote to change policy. And for us in the global north, perhaps to participate in such online campaigns and to shop more ethically. Thank you. I have to stay up here, I forgot. Can I sit down? Okay. I'm gonna sit down.
Thank you so much, Melia. Another wonderful paper with so much art that I'd never seen before. So thank you very much. I'm sure there are plenty of questions. Oh, yes, already. 3 questions already. So we'll go for Alan, and then Josh, and then Rosalia.
Thanks, Melia. That was really inspiring. Yes, and I found myself thinking of many things. One of them was going to the diplomatic district myself and being invited to the homes of some of the very wealthy and powerful who are connected with the garment industry.
Yes.
And so that got me thinking about how you're talking about, you transition from Akhtar's work on the site of the disaster and the criminal disaster too. You never used that word criminal, but I think it is criminal, isn't it? What, you know, the neglect that led to these tragic tragedies. But it struck me that there's community building going on there, and there's community destroying going on there. The community building being the community of the suffering, coming together, reenacting their care and love for those they've lost. And then in the diplomatic quarter, the community of denial being shattered out of their fictive lives. Yeah. So could you comment about that dichotomy?
Yes. Yes, happy to. So this is a shameless plug. If you are interested in the longer version, I believe next year a special edition for South Asian history and culture that I'm editing, the longer version of this comes out. And so, yes, absolutely criminal negligence. And Rana Plaza was named after the owner, Sohel Rana, who is it's generally agreed that he is he bears the brunt of the blame. He really cut all of these corners, but he has yet to be indicted, as far as I know. So yes, a lot of the art collectors, even in Bangladesh, got their money from the garment industry. And so the garment industry, it's, to use a metaphor from my talk, it's not black and white, because a lot of it has really helped the country and those very people. They would not have an opportunity to make money. It's caused, it has had a number of benefits, but it just needs to, of course, be regulated and overhauled. So yeah, there is absolutely a lot of denial, for sure.
Well, I'm just thinking about the way the work that the art does.
Yeah.
To bring people together on the one hand and disrupt on the other. And I was really struck by that level of agency.
Yeah.
I mean, I found myself thinking, what if she'd actually brought the people together, the wealthy in the diplomatic quarter and the people whose relatives were. I mean, you had the one artwork really binding those people together, and then the other one seemingly intervening as a witness.
Yeah, well, Taslima Akhtar is very much both a cultural and political activist. And she organizes major protests and the pictures are amazing. You just see just streets of garment factory workers, women that are protesting in the streets. And Akhtar has, at a grassroots level, very much organized them. And I think, I think that when especially it brings it into the streets of Dhaka and it causes traffic disruptions, etc., it is undeniable. Yeah. But change, of course, is going to come from both ends, from Bangladesh as well as the rest of the world.
Josh Fitzgerald.
Hi, Josh Fitzgerald.
So my question, it was a beautiful talk and really heavy material. Both, first talks sort of storming clouds, and then this sort of working this therapeutic sort of work through this. And so it reminded me I'm interested in this, the use, the embodiment of the object, and I was enamored by your extrapolation of the images, the visuals, but especially the use of, it looks like a state document, the profile, the portraits. The artist, Akhtar in the Kanta, the choice to use a license photo or one of these. This is what was kind of resonating with what Louis was talking about, the process of capturing and distancing, dissociating from the subject. The choice of the artist to use those images, it reminded me of Charlene Villaseñor Black has looked at Sandy Rodriguez's work on the Mexican-U.S. border and talked about that artist's choice to use family photos of children who have been lost in the process of transhuman migration, and how those become, in her work and Sandy Rodriguez's work, how they become votives, how they become sort of sanctified in that process. That's what Charlene Villaseñor Black's talked about. And so I'm wondering, the choice to use a sort of, I guess, like a legal state document versus a family photo, and stitching that into these memorial tapestries. So what you think of that? Why?
Charlene. Yeah. Okay, so for Akhtar's work, okay.
Or also the black and white. It reminds me of this. Reminds me of Desaparecido, like this sort of like disappeared in Mexico, in the Mexican context.
Okay.
You have the use of stencils in black and white sometimes, and it's a state document versus what Senor Rodriguez does.
So with Akhtar's, the family members are supplying these images and they're sewing them on, as opposed to you get this one step removed with Burson, for example. Yeah, so Burson is, for the New York quilt, for the Triangle Memorial quilt, it's photographs from old newspapers. And then, so she did consult with Akhtar, and I believe, I have to ask Burson where she got those images of the Bangladeshis. But, and then you've got this, this one, the Final Embrace, that most people would recognize now. How many people had seen that, by the way? Final Embrace, Rana Plaza? Oh, okay. Okay, a few. So, and she used that with Akhtar's permission. So I think it gives this, when they're facing the camera, it's almost like a icon or a votive that you can see in their eyes, and you're having this kind of visual conversation with them, with the dead probably. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, with a lot of them, you don't know if at the time of making they were alive or dead. Yeah, which probably with the work that Charlie, I don't know that work, but it's probably the same thing, which makes it even worse that the family's not able to get closure.
We have a question from Rosalia, and then we have Jessica.
Thank you so much for sharing this truly powerful work with us. I had two small questions. So the first was that I was really interested in the way that you kind of contextualized the practices by the contemporary Bangladeshi artists with the AIDS quilt. But I was also wondering if you've considered examining the work in relation to other art that's being created about gender-based violences in other parts of the global South, and specifically Mexico, and feminist art from the U.S.-Mexico border. So I'm thinking about some of the femicides that are based as part of the maquiladora system and the foreign, kind of exportation of textile products, but also electronics. So I'm thinking about the No Mas movement in Ciudad Juarez and the work of Teresa Margolles, who works with on indigenous femicides in Central America and at the border. As it seems like, you could really kind of touch on some of the kind of similar kind of systems of violence in the global South. But the second question is about this concept of artivism. I'm seeing this concept really active in the Latinx, kind of art movement now. And I loved the way that you kind of defined it at the end kind of for us. But I'm wondering if there is kind of something or what is distinct about this collective form of art making that sets it apart from social practice and maybe other forms of socially engaged art. So yeah, two short questions.
Okay, so the first one, absolutely, and I do get into, well, in the longer essay, I look more at, so I'm drawing from the work Julia Bryson Wilson, Frey. So that's about textile-based artwork, and she does look at some of the women's textile-based artwork that comment on that, absolutely. But I'm looking at it more as a kind of embodied empathizing. But I'd love to speak with you more about that, because I'd like to bring in more of an international point of comparison. And your second question, artivism. Yes, so I first came in contact with the term through the work, it was an essay about Judith Baca's, her recent online work, and I can't remember the names of the authors, but there's a few who have defined it more in a more lengthy way. So it's Lambert and Duncombe are the ones who describe it as taking it out of the institution, and that really refers to Akhtar's work there. So, but that would differ maybe from dialogical art, which is more about a teaching and conversation-based practice. So I would say that it's not as distinct necessarily. It's a form of socially engaged art for sure. And I don't know if there's a definition that makes this one and not the other.
Jessica Zierkin.
Hi, Melia. So great to hear your work after passing in the halls last year.
And likewise.
Something rumbling or rattling around in my head is in Christian theology, it's noted that the word martyr in the Greek was translated into witness in Latin. And I was curious if that rings any bells with you in terms of affective art and the social impact, and even kind of, the executive's refusal to participate, because it's a cost, right? It's a cost to witness and to look at that art.
Right, because I don't think you can look at this kind of work and then just turn away. So he was refusing to be a witness. Just to be clear, with the black and white being the colors of martyrdom, the martyrs being those who can, well, in this case, no longer bear witness. Martyrdom in the Bangladeshi context has to do with the independence war, and it started with the persecution and genocide of intellectuals. So the black and white is the printed word, and intellectuals, especially writing in Bangla language as opposed to Urdu during Pakistani colonization. So I think I would love to talk to you more about that, and to kind of delve deeper into the etymology of witnessing. I think that could be very significant. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I may, just because I'm curious, thinking about Parissa's presentation that about art for art's sake versus propaganda, and finding, disrupting that dichotomy and finding a different way, and like how affective art fits in there. It's quite, yeah.
I think that it's the intention to get a message across through this feeling, and ultimately to get, and I haven't asked these artists about it, but my reading is that it's to get people to respond then through this very powerful emotion. And in another piece, I look at the etymology of empathy, and excuse me, it comes to us through the German, and I apologize if there's any German speakers here, but Einfühlung, which translates roughly to feeling into, and this 19th century German philosopher, Robert Vichet, coined this concept in relation to looking at art, and essentially art as a conduit to make us feel something. And then more recent re-examinings of empathy vis-a-vis art talk about how, well, yeah, but then you're also inspired to want to change a negative situation that you feel bad about. Yeah.
A quick question from Ambreen.
Thank you for sharing these case studies. And the talk was really painful, but really thought-provoking. So I am trying to compare the ways of memorialization or commemorating in the West and in the South, just generalizing the West and the South. Wow. And just remembering my little walks around the Finity Garden, you might have observed that for memorials, they put the slabs on the ground on which people actually walk. In Squimalt Park, for example, there are again the stones that people walk over the names of the people who have died. And I was really struck by seeing here that the sheets they have used, these are big sheets that they have used to make quilts. And sheets could be on the floor, like the table. In Bangladesh, I know that people do sit on the floor and eat. So instead of doing that, the artists intentionally put it on the table and using the placemats. So I'm just wondering, ways of commemorating this and the position of the artwork. So as compared to on the floor, on the ground, or maybe a bench in the park where the name is mostly ignored, we're just giving them light by putting them on the wall in front of us or putting them on the table where we can see it very clearly.
Right, and so what you're seeing, of course, in the parks or Finity Gardens memorializes very wealthy people, right? So, and it's a permanent memorial in that it's in stone or it's a plaque in metal. So, of course, what you're thinking about is this cultural difference of not having, not walking over someone's name, not walking over this concept or the index of a name that represents the person. That would be disrespectful in all Asian cultures. So the kantas, the memorial kantas, well, first of all, kantas and textiles, by and large in South Asia, they don't come in contact with shoes, right? And that's because people take their shoes off to go into houses. So just to walk on them or to sit and have dinner on them, that's not disrespectful. But I have to ask Taslima about what happened to those quilts. I don't know if they're in her possession or the organization, the Bangladesh Workers Memorial possession. I don't think they would be used as their function changes. So stylistically, the way they're made, they are kantas, but no kanta that I've ever seen, no real Nokshe kanta, has photographs on it or people's names. They're not signed. So I think that they would have a very different ultimate location, and they're preserved, whereas most kantas are also not meticulously preserved. They're used. And they're everyday textiles, swaddling for newborns, Quran covers, yeah.
I've just got one question, and then one quick question, and then Karun will ask the final question before we have a coffee break. There's obviously, as you allude to in your talk, there's this debate about to what extent artists can bring about concrete social change. But the Jolly's work reminded me of perhaps one aspect of today's culture that artists can use as tool is the public shaming, and of course Nan Goldin did this with convincing various art institutions to discard the Sackler name. And I wonder how far you think shaming can be a way by which artists can actually force organizations, institutions to actually change their behavior.
I think that's a great idea. Jolly's work, one thing I love about it is that her work, I have to ask her about that. Her work seems to shame society at large. That's the target. So this was one series. As I think I mentioned, others deal with reproductive issues. Her latest one deals with how the women who were systematically raped in the Civil War in 1971 by Pakistani soldiers, how they were just silenced, and not by the government or anything, but it was shame attached to that. And so she's bringing them kind of into the light as individuals with that. So, and when viewers see that, I think they feel a kind of collective cultural shame. So I think Jolly is speaking to her society at large. Although in this case, she's speaking to these who, and they're named, she sent them invitations to their home. And I think that was effective. I mean, the managers, and certainly Sohel Rana, are really vilified, but I don't know why exactly they are not behind bars yet, if there's been a tribunal or, yeah.
Well, thank you. One final question, and then we'll have a half an hour, 20 to 30-minute coffee break. Karun.
Okay, I'll make it very brief. Both from the perspective of yourself as a researcher and from the perspective of the artists, can you briefly outline any risks for art that you see in the practice of artivism?
Well, especially working in Bangladesh, which I started in 2015. I previously had worked exclusively with dead patrons and artists who don't talk back. And so with these artists, and Bangladesh is a very particular place. It's undergoing more Islamization and I think silencing of women as well. But there's systems of very strong censorship, and so it's creating and showing these works of art is dangerous for the artists. And that's something that really interests me. Jolly didn't get flack, as far as I know, for this exhibition because everyone was very pissed off about it. Bangladeshis were very upset that this happened. I mean, as Alan said, it was criminal negligence. But then with her, I want to ask her when I see her this fall about the reception of her the rape victims or rape survivors series that she was doing. What kind of if that had any censorship or if maybe she lost funding or something. And another artist that I work with, I think she would see herself as an artivist, but she wants to expose the female body and presence, and so she injected herself front and center and painted all these really provocative nudes of herself. And she saw that as being a kind of activism. But that exhibition was closed down almost immediately. The police were called because it was deemed a threat to public morality. So these artists are doing a kind of negotiation about what subject matter maybe is appropriate. Sorry, was that what you were asking?
I was more asking, are there risks in your mind to art, not necessarily to the person or the artist? I wondered if, as you were thinking through, both on the, or maybe even to the historical situation that the artist is addressing, and to the people, we're assuming that these are all positive, and it seems like they're all positive interventions. I'm just kind of trying to play devil's advocate, saying, well, let's see, it's because it grabs you emotionally. Anything grabs me emotionally, I immediately go, let's step back and see, is it justified emotion or not? So that's sort of what I was asking. Is there a risk both to the practice of art and the practice of activism? And certainly, that was interesting that there was a risk to the artist that was new to me.
Sorry, I misunderstood. I think, look at the rise of populism and thinking about Trump, those huge rallies and whooping people up in the MAGA hats. I mean, that's a cultural object that people got behind. And I think that was a very powerful emotional response to that acronym of Make America Great Again. That was an emotive, very visceral response that a number of Americans had. So, and I think, maybe if you asked Sohel Rana or something, the owner of Rana Plaza, he would find this work very damaging.
Well,
I
mean is maybe the response, if it were a boycott, would be actually damaging to the very thing that perhaps they want. But if the response if it was a simplistic response, may not actually be in the direction that the activists want. Yeah. Even though that artistically there was a mission accomplished, so to speak, and then artistically, if art becomes simply as another tool in the propagandist's belt, if that's the direction that we kind of see art going. Exclusively, then is there a danger then that we also, narrow our palette, So those are the kind of questions that I had. Not that, I mean, it gripped me as well, but then I always wonder, if you get emotional, then let's evaluate that as well.
And I certainly don't think that the final the final outcome should be boycotting, because then you have millions of women who with no other way to earn money, and this is a lot of them support their families through garment labor. So that's not the answer. No, that would be counterproductive. But maybe to, like I concluded with, voting to have better infrastructure in the global garment industry, as well as shoppers demanding better pay through these online campaigns, perhaps. I mean, it's such a complex issue.
I must regrettably draw this session to a close, although I think the quantity of questions that both papers have provoked is a testament to their quality. Thank you, Melia. Shall we give Melia a round of applause?